Calvinism in America by Lorraine Boettner. When we come to study the influence of Calvinism as a political force in the history of the United States, we come to one of the brightest pages of all Calvinistic history. Calvinism came to America in the Mayflower, and Bancroft, the greatest of American historians, pronounces the Pilgrim Fathers Calvinists in their faith according to the straightest system. John Endicott, the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, the second governor of that colony, Thomas Hooker, the founder of Connecticut, John Davenport, the founder of the New Haven Colony, and Roger Williams, the founder of the Rhode Island Colony, were all Calvinists. William Penn was a disciple of the Huguenots. It is estimated that of the 3 million Americans at the time of the American Revolution, 900,000 were of Scotch or Scotch-Irish origin, 600,000 were Puritan English, and 400,000 were German or Dutch Reformed. In addition to this, the Episcopalians had a Calvinistic confession in their 39 articles, and many French Huguenots also had come to this Western world. Thus we see that about two-thirds of the colonial population had been trained in the school of Calvin. Never in the world's history had a nation been founded by such people as these. Furthermore, these people came to America not primarily for commercial gain or advantage, but because of deep religious convictions. It seems that the religious persecutions in various European countries have been providentially used to select out the most progressive and enlightened people for the colonization of America. At any rate, it is quite generally admitted that the English, Scotch, Germans, and Dutch have been most masterful people of Europe. Let it be especially remembered that the Puritans, who formed the great bulk of the settlers in New England, brought with them a Calvinistic Protestantism, that they were truly devoted to the doctrines of the great reformers, that they had an aversion for formalism and oppression, whether in the church or the state, and that New England Calvinism remained the ruling theology throughout the entire colonial period. With this background, we shall not be surprised to find that the Presbyterians took a very prominent part in the American Revolution. Our own historian Bancroft says, quote, "The Revolution of 1776, so far as it was affected by religion, was a Presbyterian measure. It was the natural outgrowth of the principles which Presbyterianism of the Old World planted in her sons, the English Puritans, the Scotch Covenanters, the French Huguenots, the Dutch Calvinists, and the Presbyterians of Ulster. So intense, universal, and aggressive were the Presbyterians in their zeal for liberty that the war was spoken of in England as, quote unquote, the Presbyterian Rebellion." An ardent colonial supporter of King George III wrote home, quote, "I fix all the blame for these extraordinary proceedings upon the Presbyterians. They have been the chief and principal instruments in all these flaming measures. They always do and ever will act against government from the restless and turbulent anti-monarchical spirit which has always distinguished them everywhere," unquote. When the news of these extraordinary proceedings reached England, Prime Minister Horace Walpole said in Parliament, "Cousin America has run off with a Presbyterian parson. John Witherspoon, President of Princeton, signer of the Declaration of Independence." History is eloquent in declaring that American democracy was born of Christianity, and that Christianity was Calvinism. The great revolutionary conflict which resulted in the formation of the American nation was carried out mainly by Calvinists, many of whom had been trained in the rigidly Presbyterian college at Princeton, and this nation is their gift to all liberty-loving people. J.R. Sizu tells us, when Cornwallis was driven back to ultimate retreat and surrender at Yorktown, all of the colonels of the colonial army but one were Presbyterian elders. More than one half of all the soldiers and officers of the American army during the Revolution were Presbyterians. The testimony of Emilio Castelar, the famous Spanish statesman, orator, and scholar, is interesting and valuable. Castelar had been professor of philosophy in the University of Madrid before he entered politics, and he was made president of the Republic, which was set up by the Liberals in 1873. As a Roman Catholic, he hated Calvin and Calvinism. Says he, "It was necessary for the Republican movement that there should come a morality more austere than Luther's, the morality of Calvin, and a church more democratic than the German, the Church of Geneva. The Anglo-Saxon democracy has for its lineage a book of a primitive society, the Bible. It is the product of a severe theology learned by the few Christian fugitives in the gloomy cities of Holland and Switzerland, where the morose shade of Calvin still wanders, and it remains serenely in the grandeur, forming the most dignified, most moral, and most enlightened portion of the human race." Says Motley, quote, "In England, the seeds of liberty wrapped up in Calvinism and hoarded through many trying years were at last destined to float over land and sea and to bear the largest harvest of temperate freedom for a great commonwealth that were still unborn. The Calvinists founded the Commonwealth of England, Holland, America, and again, to Calvinists more than to any other class of men, the political liberties of England, Holland, and America are due. The testimony of another famous historian, the Frenchman Taine, who himself held no religious faith, is worthy of consideration. Concerning the Calvinists, he said, "These men are the true heroes of England. They founded England in spite of the corruption of the Stuarts, by the exercise of duty, by the practice of justice, by obstinate toil, by vindication of right, by resistance to oppression, by the conquest of liberty, by the repression of vice. They founded Scotland, they founded the United States. At this day they are, by their descendants, founding Australia and colonizing the world." In his book, The Creed of Presbyterians, E.W. Smith asked concerning the American colonists, where learned they those immortal principles of the rights of man, human liberty, equality, and self-government, on which they based their republic, and which form today the distinctive glory of our American civilization. In the school of Calvin, they learn them. There the modern world learned them. So history teaches. We shall now pass on to consider the influence which Presbyterian exerted in the formation of the Republic. The Presbyterian Church, said Dr. W. H. Roberts in an address before the General Assembly, was for 3/4 of a century the sole representative upon the continent of Republican government as now organized in the nation. And then he continues, from 1706 to the opening of the Revolutionary struggle, the only body in existence which stood for our present national political organization was the General Synod of the American Presbyterian Church. It alone among ecclesiastical and political colonial organizations exercised authority derived from the colonists themselves over bodies of Americans scattered through all the colonies from New England to Georgia. And colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries is to be remembered while all dependent upon Great Britain were independent of each other. Such a body as the Continental Congress did not exist until 1774. The religious condition of the country was similar to the political. The congregational churches of New England had no connection with each other, and had no power apart from the civil government. The Episcopal Church was without organization. The colonies was dependent for support and ministry of the established Church of England, and was filled with an intense loyalty to the British monarchy. The Reformed Dutch Church did not become an efficient and independent organization until 1771, and the German Reformed Church did not attain to that condition until 1793. The Baptist churches were separate organizations, the Methodists were practically unknown, and the Quakers were non-combatants. Delegates met every year in the General Synod. As Dr. Roberts tells us, the church became a bond of union and correspondence between large elements of the population of the divided colonies. Is it any wonder, he continues, that under its fostering influence the sentiments of true liberty as well as the tenets of a sound gospel were preached throughout the territory from Long Island to South Carolina, and that above all a feeling of unity between the colonies began slowly but surely to assert itself. Too much emphasis cannot be laid in connection with the origin of the nation upon the influence of the ecclesiastical republic, which from 1706 to 1774 was the only representative on this continent of a fully developed federal republican institution. The United States of America owes much to that oldest of American republics, the Presbyterian Church. It is, of course, not claimed that the Presbyterian Church was the only source from which sprang the principles upon which this republic is founded, but it is claimed that the principles found in the Westminster Standards were the chief basis for the republic, and that the Presbyterian Church taught, practiced, and maintained in fullness, first in this land, that form of government in accordance with which the republic has been organized. The opening of the Revolutionary struggle found the Presbyterian ministers and churches lined up solidly on the side of the colonists, and Bancroft accredits them with having made the first bold move toward independence. The Synod, which assembled in Philadelphia in 1775, was the first religious body to declare openly and publicly for separation from England. It urged the people under its jurisdiction to leave nothing undone that would promote the end in view, and called upon them to pray for the Congress which was then in session. The Episcopalian Church, which then was still united with the Church of England, and it opposed the Revolution. A considerable number of individuals within that church, however, labored earnestly for independence and gave of their wealth and influence to secure it. It is to be remembered also that the commander-in-chief of the American armies, the father of our country, was a member of her household. Washington himself attended and ordered all of his men to attend the services of his chaplains, who were clergymen from the various churches. He gave $40,000 to establish a Presbyterian college in his native state, which took his name in honor of the gift and became Washington College. N.S. McFetridge has thrown light upon another major development of the Revolutionary period. For the sake of accuracy and completeness, we shall take the privilege of quoting him rather extensively. Quote, "Another important factor in the independent movement," says he, "was what is known as the Mecklenburg Declaration, proclaimed by the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians of North Carolina, May 20th, 1775, more than a year before the Declaration of Independence. It was the fresh, hearty greeting of the Scotch-Irish to their struggling brethren in the North, and their bold challenge to the power of England. They had been keenly watching the progress of the contest between the colonies and the Crown, and when they heard the address presented by the Congress to the King declaring the colonies in actual rebellion, they deemed it time for patriots to speak. Accordingly, they called a representative body together in Charlotte, North Carolina, which by unanimous resolution declared the people free and independent, and that all laws and commissions from the King were henceforth null and void. In their declaration were such resolutions as these: We do hereby dissolve the political bands which have connected us with the mother country, and hereby absolve ourselves from all allegiance to the British Crown. We hereby declare ourselves a free and independent people, are, and have right to be, a sovereign and self-governing association, our control of no power other than that of our God, and the general government of Congress, to the maintenance of which we solemnly pledge to each other our mutual cooperation and our lives, our fortunes, and our most sacred honor. That assembly was composed of 27 staunch Calvinists, just one-third of whom were ruling elders in the Presbyterian Church, including the president and secretary, and one was a Presbyterian clergyman. The man who drew up that famous and important document was the secretary, Ephraim Brevard, a ruling elder of the Presbyterian Church and a graduate of Princeton College. Bancroft says of it that it was, in effect, a declaration as well as a complete system of government. It was sent by special messenger to the Congress in Philadelphia and was published in the Cape Fear Mercury and was widely distributed throughout the land. Of course, it was speedily transmitted to England, where it became the cause of intense excitement. The identity of sentiment and similarity of expression in this declaration and the Great Declaration written by Jefferson could not escape the eye of the historian. Hence, Tucker, in his Life of Jefferson, says, Everyone must be persuaded that one of these papers must have been borrowed from the other, but it is certain that Brevard could not have borrowed from Jefferson, for he wrote more than a year before Jefferson. Hence, Jefferson, according to his biographers, must have borrowed from Brevard. But it was a happy plagiarism, for which the world will freely forgive him. In correcting his first draft of the Declaration, it can be seen in at least a few places that Jefferson has erased the original words and inserted those which are first found in the Mecklenburg Declaration. No one can doubt that Jefferson had Brevard's resolution before him when he was writing his immortal Declaration. This striking similarity between the principles set forth in the form of government of the Presbyterian Church and those set forth in the Constitution of the United States has caused much comment. When the fathers of our republic sat down to frame a system of representative and popular government, says Dr. E.W. Smith, their task was not so difficult as some have imagined. They had a model to work by. If the average American citizen were asked who was the founder of America, the true author of our great republic, he might be puzzled to answer. We can imagine his amazement at hearing the answer given to this question by the famous German historian Rank, one of the profoundest scholars of modern times. Says Rank, John Calvin was the virtual founder of America. D. Aubigny, whose History of the Reformation is a classic, writes, Calvin was the founder of the greatest of republics. The Pilgrims who left their country in the reign of James I and landing on the barren soil of New England founded populous and mighty colonies were his sons, his direct and legitimate sons, and that American nation, which we have seen growing so rapidly, boasts as his father, the humble reformer on the shore of Lake Lemont. Dr. E.W. Smith says these revolutionary principles of the Republican liberty and self-government taught and embodied in the system of Calvin were brought to America, and this new land where they have borne so mighty a harvest were planned by whose hands? The hands of the Calvinists. The vital relation of Calvin and Calvinism to the founding of the free institutions of America, however strange in some ears the statement of Rank may have sounded, is recognized and affirmed by historians of all lands and creeds. All this has been thoroughly understood and candidly acknowledged by such trained and philosophic historians as Bancroft, who so far he was from being Calvinistic in his own personal convictions, simply calls Calvin the father of America, and adds, He who will not honor the memory and respect the influence of Calvin knows but little of the origin of American liberty. When we remember the two-thirds of the population at that time of the Revolution had been trained in the school of Calvin, and when we remember how unitedly and enthusiastically the Calvinists labored for the cause of independence, we readily see how true are the above testimonies. There were practically no Methodists in America at the time of the Revolution. In fact, the Methodist Church was not officially organized as such in England until the year 1784, which was 3 years after the American Revolution closed. John Wesley, great and good man though he was a Tory and a believer in political non-resistance. He wrote against the American Rebellion but accepted the providential result. McFettridge tells us that Methodists had hardly a foothold in the colonies when the war began. In 1773, they claimed about 160 members. Their ministers were almost all, if not all, from England, and were staunch supporters of the Crown against American independence. Hence, when the war broke out, they were compelled to fly from the country. Their political views were naturally in accord with those of their great leader, John Wesley, who wielded with all the power of his eloquence and influence against the independence of the colonies. Bancroft, A History of the United States, Volume 7, page 61. He did not foresee that independent America was to be the field on which his noble church was to reap her largest harvest, and then in that declaration which he so earnestly opposed to lay the security of the liberties of his followers. In England and America, the great struggles for civil and religious liberty were nursed in Calvinism, inspired by Calvinism and carried out largely by men who were Calvinists. And because the majority of historians have never made a serious study of Calvinism, they have never been able to give us a truthful and complete account of what it has done in these countries. Only the light of historical investigation is needed to show us how our forefathers believed in it and were controlled by it. We live in a day when the services of the Calvinists in the founding of this country have been largely forgotten, and one can hardly treat the subject without appearing to be a mere eulogizer of Calvinism. We may well do honor to that creed which has been borne such sweet fruits, and to which America owes so much.